Spy Cops Info Podcast, a series on the secret undercover political police that infiltrated over 1,000 campaign groups since 1968. Episode 37, HN1, the lying prick who called himself Matt Rayner. Okay, welcome to Spy Cops Info Podcast. My name's Tom Fowler and I'm joined with
Chris Bryan from the Undercover Research Group.
And we're joined by
Liz Fuller, one of the core participants that was deceived by HN1 into a relationship.
Yeah, and today we're talking about HN1, the undercover police officer who used the cover name Matt Rayner and infiltrated animal rights groups in the 90s. We heard HN1 gave evidence back in January of 2025. Only a few days ago. It's not long finished, the end of phase 2. He gave 3 days of evidence, but he was so slow and so ponderous and so evasive in his replies, he ended up coming back and giving another 2 days. Liz also gave evidence, and also Paul Gravitt, who also knew HM1, as well as Claire Hildreth, who gave evidence about him. So we've heard a fair bit about HM1, but I thought it'd be a good time to kind of get together and do a podcast episode about him.
For those who've listened to the podcast before, that the evidence in tranche 2 is different because the officers gave evidence for much longer, over several days often, but also there was a lot more civilian witnesses. So you mentioned all the ones that gave live evidence, but in addition there was a bunch of written statements as well. So there's just a lot more volume of stuff to go through. Just want to sort of mention that because makes it quite different.
Yeah, definitely. Also, the deployments have changed quite a lot from the ones that we've looked at so far, which can relate it to stuff from tranche 1, pretty much, mostly. It's even within tranche 2, by the time we get to HM1, rather than like infiltrating like groups or areas, or it seems very much HM1 was targeted against a list of individuals. And like quite a lot of the questioning of HM1 particularly started with kind of going through this list of individuals who he had identified as supposedly being the animal rights extremists, which interestingly did not tally whatsoever with a list that he was asked to make himself, with the ones that in a report he made at the end. Yeah, there's one of many contradictions really in what we heard from HM1.
Yeah, there were, but I think like Lambert, being his handler, had it in for Jeff already. And so that's why I think Jeff was the main target for them.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely like a link, isn't there, between what Lambert did when he was deployed and then how he directed those he was managed in the next wave, particularly HM1. Also John Dines, I think, as well, but HM1 particularly.
Also in particular as well, the first person that Matt approached was, I mean, I know he went through the hunt sabs, but when he went out, do you remember that hearing in evidence that he actually went out in the field before he was supposed to, without any of his cover ID or anything? He had gone to I think it was just like an animal rights fair, and then one of the first people he approached there was Paul Gravitt. Now, funnily enough, Paul Gravitt and Jeff Shepherd were very close friends at the time. So, you know, he'd obviously sort of done his homework.
Yeah, this was like why he was, he went to the Anton McDonald's fair or the London Greenpeace fair? I forget what it was called at the time.
I think it was London Greenpeace fair, and then went and found Paul Gravitt's stall and said he was, interested in animal rights and interested in volunteering at LBAC and things like that.
And that was in the October when his deployment wasn't meant to start until the January.
It wasn't even meant to start, no.
We heard from him that he only sorted out cover accommodation in the May.
I know, yeah.
So for the whole of the initial period of his deployment, he was going back to his own address.
Yeah, to his address where his wife would have lived, or there was some other address that we found. Whether he ever stayed there or not, you know, I don't know. You know, whether it was a friend or a relative or that, you know, I'm not sure.
Maybe one of the main things about his testimony overall is that he created this, if you like, alternative version of events about how he interacted with activists and groups, of him being very much an observer rather than a participant. And that sort of like
that's rubbish.
Was very much contrary to what all the civilian witnesses said.
And what photographic evidence says. I really wish when he'd said, like when he was in court and he said, "Oh, I took very much back seat, I'm not that brave and I'll wear that," and all that kind of thing. I wish that the barrister then could have said, "Could you explain this then, please, HN1?" And clicked up on a screen pictures of him with his face in that hump marshal's face, virtually, you could see he was looking quite threatening. I mean, don't get me wrong, I've no sympathy for the hump marshal. And again, when he was being arrested outside a fur demo and some uniform copper had his hand on his arm and he's just like, really sort of facing him out. And oh, sorry, it's my cat. And yeah, it's just a shame none of that actual visual evidence could have been shown.
Were there some other incidents we can talk about in terms of that sort of contradiction of, that I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. Perhaps you probably might have a better recollection, Liz.
Sorry.
So, in terms of instances where Rayner was HN1, was saying that he was just an observer, like a number of instances where that did not seem to be the case.
No, one of the hunts, he had a cipher, so I can't say his name, but he was one of the leading sads, very well respected. I think in his statement, he said Matt was one of the first to get stuck in and stuff, like that. Yeah, so it just simply isn't true.
Yeah, that was Walter, one of the hunt sabs.
Yeah, I think he might have been named as Walter. Yeah.
I mean, we saw the example with his arrest in Yorkshire, where, literally, he contradicted himself just whilst he was giving evidence of I was very much an observer. We did get arrested. Oh, yes, I got arrested. He claimed he hadn't left his van. Oh, he did leave his van just to get arrested.
Yeah.
And we had this ridiculous situation where he claims he was very much at the back, the least involved, yet Paul Gravitt was there and didn't get arrested.
Yeah, so how did that happen there? And what makes that even more sinister, that arrest as well, is it was in the same town as the child whose identity he'd stolen. And it's almost like more of his risk-taking behaviour, how he sort of seemed to enjoy this kind of, I don't know, just sort of taking risks and pushing boundaries and probably not even listening to rules, because I noticed during his evidence, whenever he was probably told off, if you like, by his superiors, he called it a conversation, whereas I doubt it was a conversation, it was a dressing down. He
kept calling the questioning that he was getting, which at the inquiry, which was about his wrongdoing, as a conversation, quite belittling. Initially he kept calling Scargita, the barrister for the inquiry, by her first name, and he dropped that because he first gave evidence for 3 days and then he had to return for a further 2. When he returned for the further 2, he seemed to have dropped that particular affectation.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, he'd stopped calling her Emma. Yeah, he kept calling her, like it was sort of like really informal, as if he was talking to one of his friends or colleagues in the room, Yeah.
That led to speculation that perhaps he did know her socially, which, to be honest, that seems unlikely. That it'd be unlikely that she would have been allowed to question him if that was the case. But
she shouldn't have been. She really shouldn't have been. But who knows what goes on in, this sort of corrupt world of so-called legality and litigation. I don't know.
He certainly, given his demeanour, his language and his accent, he really presented himself as a member of the establishment in a really overt way during his questioning.
I think that other than his posh accent, but also I think one of the ways he evaded responsibility was to present himself as part of a system as well. Is very much like he often referred to things in the third person.
And the machine.
Machine, yeah, machine.
The machine, exactly. Sort of very clinical. The use of data points was another thing that it was just another data point, another part. That was partially, I don't know, self-deception, in terms of playing down his own personal responsibility for what happened, but also I think reflects the fact he probably is and wasn't, maybe still is, embedded in that system.
Yeah, he definitely played down a lot of things. One of the things he particularly, I mean, he played down any involvement with any kind of any kind of criminal damage or any kind of direct action. But one of the things he played down was even any sort of involvement in the Hansabs, which, given the evidence we've got, just seemed really ridiculous. But he kept saying, "Oh no, we didn't really get much involved with the Hansabs." And I mean, I take that with his kind of establishment credentials he's trying to present himself with. I wonder if he socializes with people these days who hunt.
He was really good friends with Walter. I remember him taking me to Walter's business premises, which were really nice. It was just like this really big informal office in a garden, and Walter was playing the guitar. He was a good guitarist. And you don't just drop in like that and get on that well and have a coffee with somebody that you barely know, really. And they clearly had a good relationship. So this stuff about non-involvement with Hansard was absolute lies, because that is all Walter did, was hunt hunting. He didn't go on any other demos or protests. His passion was hunting. So to say that he had very little involvement is utter nonsense.
Yeah, and he had such like special measures for his privacy, and we've got used to the kind of really high levels of privacy for former undercover officers from the inquiry, but I really feel like HN1 took it to a new level. I mean, he didn't have voice modulation that we heard for HN106, but beyond that, he had pretty much every special treatment you could possibly get.
So, yeah, just to explain to listeners, like Liz was the only non-state person who was actually allowed to see him whilst he was giving evidence.
That was quite last minute as well, wasn't it? I mean, they only informed you that would be the case. Was it the day before or on the day?
Yeah, it was a day or so before. Yeah, it was very short notice. Yeah.
Oh, just to go back, probably several steps, is that just to remind again listeners that originally John Mitting said that all undercover officers who had sexual relationships, their real name would be given as well, and Matt Rayner is one of those where he's reversed his decision on that,
which is really disgraceful. And I mean, just really shows that assurances from the chair of the inquiry really can't be relied upon. Any assurance that he does give, there's every possibility he'll renege on it or reverse it, and not really giving any reasons as to why until later. The only sort of like credible reason that it seems to be is that he fears that somehow he won't get cooperation if he doesn't bend over backwards for these undercover officers. I think the inquiry has the ability to compel witnesses. It hasn't really used that. It's just sort of relied on kind of getting these men to do it.
Well, I mean, the impression I've got is they may not have used it, but certainly in some of the restriction orders, the way they were worded, it was basically the Mitting would have used those powers to compel officers to attend. Obviously, he only has those powers if they live in the UK, which led me to speculate at the time that maybe HN1 lives outside of the UK, but that does not. I think there was something else which suggested that wasn't the case. I can't even remember now. So obviously, one of the frustrating things was in terms of the restriction order, both on his real name and also the fact that most of us weren't allowed to see his face, was that it did seem to be for privacy reasons, Article 8.
Yeah, Article 8. Yeah, right to a private life.
Because if Mitting had said, well, his life is at risk, that would probably be more understandable, even if we didn't totally accept. It's quite like, to be fair, we probably would have not accepted that, but at least that's probably a pretty good reason for someone getting given anonymity. Whereas a privacy reason for someone who's breached people's privacy, to say the very least, seems a much weaker justification, doesn't it?
It's really ironic as well, how can you just say that? Well, I've got a right to a private life that you civilians haven't.
Yeah, I mean that's the overriding message the inquiry has given out with its way in which it's handled co-participants from the police and versus those who are non-police. It's clear that they've got a lot more rights than us in this entire process. HN1's deployment, as we said, was very coloured by who his manager was, Bob Lambert. But I mean, I think the way he gave evidence was really coloured by how Bob Lambert gave evidence, and they really kind of used the same approach. Though I think HN1, to be fair to him, was more coherent than Bob Lambert. It would harden up to be less coherent. It was, he gave very long answers, which didn't say much. He used the most long-winded forms of saying things possible. It was incredibly frustrating questioning. I think like nearly everybody was annoyed by him because we weren't in the hearing room with him. There was more opportunity for people in the hearing room to like vent their exasperation with the evidence, something we're not normally able to do because they're in the room. And I mean, it was pretty constant, even if it was just heavy sighs during his evidence or just, little comments now and again. I think pretty much everybody who was listening to the evidence was finding it unbearable to listen to his, not just his nonsense, but like just the way in which he was.
Repetitive nonsense.
Such nonsense.
I mean, one of the lines of questioning to HN1 was about just how radical, in inverted commas, that animal rights activists were. So the way that they were was the way that they were represented in reports reflective of reality. And for instance, a lot of his answers were phrased in the ways, well, those views were present, or that was a sentiment, but not shared by everybody, or some people had those views, and therefore he's kind of like not. He's both saying his reports are accurate, and also not accurate at the same time. It's all about interpretation. So there's a lot of ambiguity in his answers.
That's it. He called it a nuance, didn't he, or something at some point? Yeah. And that was after he was asked to just say yes or no.
Oh, yeah. And there's sometimes, I think occasionally he said, oh, that wasn't my wording.
Yeah. That he said that quite frequently, actually. That wasn't my wording. That might be what's written at the end report. But these reports are then, well, he didn't say manufactured, but he said, passed on for processing and then typed up. And I think that the meaning can come across differently as to how I wrote it. But the other one was he said, I don't recall writing that.
I mean, and similarly, in terms of when he was questions about was it 2 appearances in court as a witness? Is that right?
Yeah.
I mean, basically, when he was asked whether he thought that was ethical and it was not misleading the court, he said, well, that was SDS strategy, policy, nothing to do with me. I didn't have any responsibility for that decision to appear in court in my cover name, committing perjury or misleading the court as in terms of my, real intention as a defense witness.
I mean, when he was pushed on that, he described it as the benign end of the amorphous grey area.
Oh, yes.
Says everything, really.
He basically excused giving false evidence in court by saying that the evidence he gave was useless in the sense that it wasn't complete, that he didn't see this person's behaviour at all time, as if that would be different from any defence witness at all. Obviously, if you're at an event, no witness has a panoramic view of everything that goes on. So the idea that for some reason that made his perjury, not as a severe a case as perjury is laughable, really.
He talked a lot about himself in the third person. So again, something Lambert did quite a lot. So talking about Matt Rayner as if that was somebody else. He refused to accept that he was in any way manipulative. He had the apology the Met Police had given to all the women read out to him. He was, whatever. I mean, he sort of accepted it without really kind of giving any sort of sense of really accepting it, but said that his wife didn't need it because they had a private understanding.
Yeah. Whatever that meant, I don't know what that was.
It was at the very beginning of his evidence, wasn't it? I think maybe the first day, or maybe it was just the first day, that he basically denied responsibility for the relationship, more or less, or at least that he didn't think he was doing anything wrong. And secondly, he didn't not accepting the wording of the police apology. That was pretty much his opening gambit, as it were.
Of course, he was deployed at the same time as HN2, Andy Coles, and HN5, John Dines, who were also infiltrating animal rights. He really didn't like Andy Coles much, though. I mean, both men avoided the opportunity to throw each other under the bus completely. You could tell that he got particularly annoyed to find out that Andy Coles had reported him to his managers as being under suspicion by other activists and had not informed him personally. That was probably the most angry he was, like the whole of the time he was giving evidence.
He was,
This bothered him more than anything.
because he said, well, I think his reply to that was, well, that certainly isn't something I would have done. And when asked why, he said, well, one, professional loyalty, and two, a duty of care. And yeah, I think Coles was the only one he referred to as Mr. Coles, like really formally kind of distancing from him, yeah.
Yeah, we saw a lot of like a few references to like feelings within the branch about various things. So like, or within the unit rather. So there was a thing about him because he managed to extend his deployment.
Yes.
And there was like this idea there might be some pushback within the unit about it.
Professional jealousy. Yeah. And he just says, I don't care. That's what he said. And then something about, what was it, a grand armchair?
Yeah, that those who sit in the grand armchair might have thought differently. That this, I mean, maybe there actually was a grand armchair in the safe house meeting room or something, or maybe it was one of his metaphors. It's hard to tell.
Yeah, it's difficult to tell with him because he uses such flowery, incomprehensible language that, yeah, I think he does it on purpose. I think it's almost like, have you ever heard that expression? If you can't convince them, confuse them. I think that's what he was trying to do with his language. Yeah.
I mean, just on the comparison with Lambert and his testimony, I thought that HN1 came over much more arrogant, whereas like Lambert, either as a deliberate ploy, was much less like that and very, I don't know, try to be as boring as possible and not avoid controversy in how he put things to some extent. I mean, maybe that's just my memory, though. I don't know if you think that's true.
Well, yeah, he wasn't very engaging, and as like I think you both pointed out, he just put everything down to the machine, and when questions on any aspect of that, he says, "Oh no, I had absolute total faith in the machine or the system or whatever." So he abdicated responsibility for all of it by saying he had total faith in the system, and yeah, he was just an agent of the system. So anything he did, he wasn't responsible for. The system was.
Exactly. Well, I suppose one of the latter instances we heard was about his arrest outside St John's Wood tube station, regarding a demonstration outside the home of fur trader Michael Hockley, and that was the one where HM1 gets basically relatively seriously injured by a uniformed officer on or after arrest. Yeah, so in that instance, that he got basically a police officer kneeled on his back and he suffered cracked ribs. That was right, wasn't it? And he was actually asked a few questions around the fact, well, shouldn't he have reported that officer to made a complaint against him basically? And he said, oh no, that wasn't it wasn't worth it. And he just thought, and it was laughed about with his SDS colleagues. He thought it was a quite funny, unfortunate but minor occupational hazard. As we know, we've heard quite a few, if you like, police on police assaults from the very beginning of the inquiry, haven't we? I don't know, I kind of lost count now. We were counting at one page. We're probably into double figures now in terms of uniformed officers assaulting undercovers.
Yeah, easily double figures. And in some cases, the same officer multiple times by uniformed officers. I mean, it's something which we, when Mark Kennedy was first unmasked, it was something which a lot of people were like, oh no, he can't have been, because I remember him getting terribly badly hurt at climate camp. It's part of this whole thing, which we heard a lot about with the arrests as well, of it kind of giving credibility. So it wasn't even that they were that, yeah, he broke a rib, but he might have done him a favor in other ways.
On that arrest, notably, he was held in a cell with Greg Avery, and he was later to be very heavily involved in the Shack campaign. That's right, isn't it? Yeah, I'm not. Yeah. Yeah. So, but there was definitely a thing about that it was just like not even within his comprehension that it was his responsibility about perhaps that riot cops' behaviour might actually carry on and injure more protesters. That clearly was never ever a concern for him or SDS management.
He described it as being as, "Oh, I wasn't there to change the world." No shit, Matt. From the start, it seems he had a list of people who was his sort of like role to infiltrate. But when he was asked about the spying on the McLibel campaign, which was, a fairly massive topic in the scenes that he was moving in, he kept saying that he wasn't interested in that, and was really desperately trying to get off the topic. So there was the fact that he was, when Liz was babysitting for Dave Morris, when Dave Morris was working on McLibel stuff, that meant that HN1 had access to Dave Morris's house. He's like, "Oh, I had no interest in checking out all the paperwork for the legal case that was in that room." And the things about Helen Steele in general, also no interest in that, no interest. Really tried to play down any sort of proximity to anything to do with either of them for some reason.
That's rubbish. He went out of his field and beyond his targets as well, because he was allocated a particular area. He was supposed to get passes, but he went out that area that he didn't bother to get. And there was this one particular guy who's quite a well-known activist, John. I mean, he wasn't supposed to be one of his targets because, he was in sort of a different part, but he targeted him as well. I mean, he just wanted to round up as many as he could and get as much praise and, sort of promotion as he could, really, Yeah, I mean, he was just trying to escalate his career, get his commendation, and he didn't really care who was
Yeah, I mean that final report which he authored about supposed animal rights extremists, which this questioning by Emma opened with, he claimed that there were animal rights activists who were planning and almost certainly would soon be committing murder in the name of the Animal Liberation Front. Something that there was just zero evidence of in any, zero evidence in general, but certainly none in any of his reports.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, wouldn't you think that would be the first thing you would put in an official report if you thought that people's lives were at risk? And yeah, there was none of that in his reports, and there was absolutely no evidence of it either.
Wasn't it based on one offhand comment made by Jeff Shepherd? Is that right? That there was something along. Clearly, it was never made in the context it was made. And it was not made so.
You know what people say? Oh, like a statement may be something like, "Oh, they need lining up and shooting." Now that's the kind of it's like an off the cuff kind of remark. It's like if Tom or you stood on my foot and I said, "If you do that again, I'll kill you." It's it's a saying. It doesn't mean it's meant literally. It's just utter nonsense, and it would be first thing I would have thought. I mean, his role as a police officer to sort of protect the public, not sort of wait for somebody or incite somebody to go and kill one of them before you put it in your report.
No, I mean, it was just insane. I mean, the levels to which he invented stuff. I mean, particularly the one that really stands out for me as just like beyond insanity, really, is the supposed plan for the Animal Liberation Front activists to go and kill a lot of turkeys. Like, for one, regardless of any sort of like ideological argument about whether they're going to die anyway or whatever, there's just no way that an ALF cell was going to engage, like busy itself with killing a lot of turkeys. But then this, which is clear, and he describes it as like idle chatter in the pub, gets its way into official reports, ends up with Special Branch claiming that they've successfully foiled an ALF plan to destroy Christmas by killing all these turkeys. He ends up with a commendation of it, handwritten note from the commissioner of police. Like, it's just so like ridiculous, just so utterly ridiculous. If this wasn't so serious and involved people's actual lives, it would be hilarious. I mean, like, how on earth? And you start to see this pattern, really, that it's these made up things that they then pat themselves on the back for foiling, that really kind of justifies the existence of this unit over so many years.
I mean, it's the whole unit. I mean, as has come out over this part of the hearings, that if you like circular economy, basically, of intelligence getting circulated within the SDS and it never being or rarely tested in court. In fact, I mean, going off a little bit to Bob Lambert, the whole reason that SDS officers didn't give evidence in court is that they were so closely entwined with the criminal acts that were being committed, if there were any. And the whole reason what Bob Lambert and that Debenhams incident happened the way it was, because that was the only way he could think of using the intelligence he was getting or creating by actually plotting the plan in the first place, was to fabricate reports based on the fact that he only knew parts or small dots, as HN1 might say, of the plan, whereas of course he knew of the plan in its entirety. And that was, I think, Lambert's improvisation to the fact that he knew about something which was relatively seriously, but he couldn't communicate it in an honest way because of his very deep involvement in it.
Yeah, and HM1 was, just as deep into committing illegal acts as Bob Lambert. And it's very clear that it seems clear to me anyway, or clear to most of us, that this is the tactic that the SDS were using by this stage of, you need to be fully engaged in the kind of illegal activity that you're looking to report on, so that people will trust you enough to share information about other acts that are going to take place, so that you can report on them. I mean, we saw internal SDS documents that pretty much said exactly that, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of other, if you like, circumstantial evidence about the houses getting raided, but also I suppose you can, one of the, I suppose, similarities between Lambert and HM1 is that yes, they were heavily involved, but they sort of wrote themselves out of the reports in terms of their actual involvement. So they're very much like off stage in the reporting, but the reality was they were very much like the main character.
Yeah, even though they sort of like wrote themselves in as observers or narrators. Yeah.
The real connection between like what Lambert did and what he did is so unbroken. I mean, particularly we've mentioned it a few times, but Jeff Shepherd, it was very clear that though Lambert had got Jeff Shepherd put into prison for all those years, it seemed HM1's role as soon as he went undercover was to find a way to get Jeff Shepherd back in prison. Seems to be the basis of his deployment almost.
I wouldn't be at all surprised if they had some sort of bet on it. Like it was a game, you know what I mean? Like a bit of game, a bit of a laugh.
So I think there was one incident that you spoke about, Liz, where there was a meeting where potentially illegal activity was being discussed, and Jeff Shepherd walked out, and then HM1 Matt Rayner actually persuaded him to come back in.
Yeah, he did. Yeah. Jeff said, actually, I don't want any part in this. Changed my mind. I don't want to do it. And I remember him quite clearly just leaving the house, walking out, closing the door, and Matt saying, "Oh, I'm going to go and talk to him." And yeah, must have followed him in his car. About 30 minutes later, they came back, and Jeff had agreed to engage again. But that just goes to show, I don't know, just how manipulative Matt or HN1, whatever we call him, was, because Jeff wasn't easily persuaded or dissuaded into doing anything. He was a very strong-minded character, and so I've still no idea what was said between them in that conversation. I should have asked Jeff actually years later, but I never did. But yeah, he did manage to persuade him back. And Jeff categorically had said, I want no part in it.
Yeah, no, the whole thing with Jeff Shepherd, one of the other things which HM1 said, which is something that Lambert had said before, was that, he would have considered Jeff Shepherd a good friend if in any other walk of life. And it's this really kind of like slightly disturbing sort of approach that they've got of like kind of trying to pretend that they were somehow, there was something genuine about these friendships, which is just It's really offensive as much as anything else.
I mean, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance, isn't there? I mean,
To start off with, HN1 claimed that he had no involvement whatsoever, none at all, in any kind of direct action that Jeff Shepherd was doing. As the questioning went on, he changed his tune a bit and had to admit that, oh, yes, he drove as part of an overspill from a demonstration, or didn't know what was going to happen when he drove to such a place, or, I mean, just not at all credible explanations of his involvement.
yeah, he gave a lot of people lifts, but he didn't know where he was going. Seemed to be that. Yeah, it gives. Yeah, that seemed to be more or less what he was saying. Like the Grand National one was a big one, wasn't it? Where there was like serious disruption of the race, which hit the headlines at the time. What was that? What year was that? 93? Am I saying that wrong? I mean, that was one where he basically denied that he had any knowledge of what was going to happen when they got there, which was just not at all believable.
His answers as well were not just like that he didn't know. It was, oh, I can't quite remember. Oh, I don't remember that one. I'm pretty sure I wasn't there that time. And, very kind of evasive answers.
And he could hear everything from the front of that van. It wasn't like there was a barrier between the front seat and us lot sitting in the back. I mean, well, I usually was sitting in the front with him because I was so cool going out with him. But I mean, we could easily have conversations right from the driver's seat, the front passenger seat, to the back of the van. We all joined in. I mean, it wasn't like, oh, sorry, I can't hear you at the back or anything like that. I mean, it just simply wasn't like that. It was like being, I guess, if all of you were in a very small, tiny box room, you could hear everything. And if anybody had been whispering, I can guarantee you Matt would have noticed in his rearview mirror. He was very observant.
Yeah, I mean, he came up with some really ridiculous answers. Like there was one where he didn't deny that he drove people to the London School of Psychology the one night when glass was smashed there, but that it wasn't pre-planned. That he just gone taking people for a drive there in the middle of the night.
In the middle of the night, but yeah, I know. He said, yeah, I was driving them there, but I didn't know what was going to happen. I often drove people to protests, and that was when Emma Gargott did say to him, "What, in the middle of the night?" And he went, "Well, I still didn't know what was going to happen." I mean, anybody with any common sense, I know that if it was me and I was going to drive somebody somewhere in the middle of the night, I would sort of say, why are we going there? What for?
Yeah, can't it wait till tomorrow?
Yeah, exactly. Can't it wait until tomorrow? Why would you want to go in the middle of the night? Yeah.
I mean, at one point, his answers got so ridiculous. I mean, he claimed that, he couldn't possibly have driven his van through Whitechapel. That would have been the Whitechapel area. Oh, and his van was such an odd van, it couldn't have possibly been driven at night through Whitechapel.
It was an ordinary, plain-looking delivery kind of van that he would have driven anyway. I mean, bearing in mind, with his cover job and his instruments and stuff like that, he would have driven it through sort of any area, any time, and it was completely, inconspicuous.
Remind us what his cover job was again, Liz.
It was delivering musical instruments all over the country, a lot of the time to apparently Shropshire and I think as far as Wales. I don't know. I can't remember the company it was supposed to be for. It was Barnes and Mullins or something. I can't remember. But yeah, it was driving large musical instruments. In fact, one evening, I wasn't there, but Claire told me he did actually have the back full of musical instruments, various things. So I dare say that was, just to sort of prove to them, look, I do this, kind of thing. But it was a cover job, wasn't it? That it was arranged for him. So.
Yes, I mean, so his evidence is that he really did do that job. That I mean, there wasn't a lot of it, but that he did actually do it. And there was some regular deliveries he was making to Oswestry that he really was doing on a regular basis. Why on earth? I mean, that's the first we've heard of like an undercover officer doing their cover job like properly. Though after him, James Straven takes that to another level of basically attempting to have a career undercover, which is wild.
It's probably something picked up by friends. I'm sorry to interrupt. It's just that, don't forget, he carried on seeing activists after his deployment. And one of them actually went out to France and he took her to a vineyard where he supposedly worked and showed her all the vines and how they did, sort of like how they processed the wine. And, things like that. So I mean, he just took this to a whole new level. I mean, he's a complete fantasist. Yeah. So, and that was something that wasn't really questioned very much in court. Why did you continue to have contact with activists after your deployment had ended? They didn't seem to really focus very much on that, as if it wasn't a huge deal. And I think it was.
Seems odd.
I mean, I think part of that was to do with the fact that he gave such long-winded answers, and that it was 5 days to question him. It wouldn't surprise me if there was a whole line of questioning right at the end that just dropped off the page.
Yeah, that just wasn't time for. Yeah, yeah, and he did that on purpose.
Certainly, the ending felt rushed.
Yeah, oh, it did. It was really rushed, because then something had happened. I can't quite remember. Was it some security breach or something? And then Mittin had to leave the room to discuss something with the barrister for the last 10 minutes. And then they had to come back in, and Mittin himself, you could see, was getting a bit like, we're getting really short of time. We really have to crack on, kind of thing. And yeah, I do recall that, and I think that Matt sort of, well, he did it on purpose, didn't he? Using 4 words when he could have used one, using 4-syllable words when he could have said yes or no. And yeah.
I mean, I think this is another tactic that, like Lambert used it successfully as well, is just do it so slowly, they will run out of time. That the inquiry runs out of road eventually. There's a couple of extra days here and there they could add to, but yeah, very frustrating, but I think almost certainly a tactic by the undercover cops or whoever's coaching them, whether that's their lawyer or whoever else.
But his lawyers were very hostile towards me. I know that, because I wanted to know who his solicitor was, and I went and asked them. And honestly, anybody think that I just poured a cup of wee over his head or something, the way he responded to me? Yeah, like as if I was a really distasteful character, like sort of really, like how they, and apparently I was allowed to talk to them, because I checked with my barristers first. I wasn't going to approach them unless I was asked to, unless I was allowed to, and I was allowed to. But yeah, they were really very hostile towards me in a really brief conversation, and all I wanted to know who his solicitor was. So.
Yeah, what did you make of your experience giving evidence to the inquiry? Did you feel you got the opportunity to say the things you wanted to say?
Largely, I suppose I did, yeah, but I don't know. As I said, there was one bit that just got quite emotional, because she was asking me stupid questions. I mean, I know she's a neutral barrister, but when she said, well, when you say you feel guilt, how would you describe guilt? I mean, first of all, I think, everybody probably feels guilt differently, just the same way they feel love or anger or any other emotion difficulty differently. So what I was trying to do, what I attempted to do, was to take her through the levels of guilt, like whether, you might have said something insensitive to somebody and seen, painful expression on their face, or accidentally trading on a snail. But I started on the wrong one. I started with the childhood trauma, and that just sort of blew it. But what I did find, and what I said was, I just felt they were focusing more on what we were doing than what the police were doing. And this was supposed to be a police inquiry. Yeah, all the questions were sort of, well, did you do this? Did you do that? Did your friends do this? Did you have any intention of doing that? Well, why are you asking me that? It's not about me. And yeah, so that was, because that took up quite a lot of time. I mean, I had 1 day of evidence, and they spent half of it questioning me about my act.
I think you did really well of just resisting this bullshit line of questioning. And we saw it a lot during the first tranche of the inquiry, where literally activists were just being taken through every report about them, going, it says something about you being violent here in this bit. What do you say to that? What do you say to that?
And that just seemed really unfair. I mean, if the inquiry is into the police, then the inquiry should be into the police, not into what you've been doing. Yeah, I wasted a bit of time myself, obviously, because I got a bit upset, and I think I left for about 15, 20 minutes. But
I mean, you really didn't waste any time at all. I mean, given the way the inquiry wastes time left, right, and centre.
yeah, I think she could have asked me some different questions, but then I could have maybe just put those in myself. I don't know. But I do think they spent more time focusing on me and other activists than they did on Matt, or, sort of like, the relationship, or, his involvement, and his level of involvement.
Yeah, often these questions are ones that would have been passed on from the police lawyers for the counsel for the inquiry to ask. Not that that's a justification for it, but just I guess that's just the way it's happened.
It was Rachel Naylor who questioned you, wasn't it? And I think she did the least amount of work into sort of crafting those kind of questions from different places into like a narrative. It really felt like she was just going to, oh, here are the questions from here. Here's the questions from here. I really felt she kind of failed to kind of put that into any kind of real narrative as such. I don't know.
Yeah, and I guess that contrasts with the barrister who was questioning Rayner, Emma Gargiter, who obviously had done her homework. So that sounds a bit patronising. I didn't mean it in that way. She obviously done a hell of a lot of work in preparation to question Rayner.
But yeah, I mean, it's difficult with the inquiry because the whole bloody process is designed for the legal profession, right, and not for us. Unless as activists, like engaging with it is always like what we're looking to get out of the process and what the actual inquiry is looking to get out of the process are quite different things. So it's always a difficult process for people to to appear as witnesses there. Have you got any advice for anybody who is facing being a witness in the next phase of hearings about how to approach it?
I would say just make sure that you've got a lot of support with you, and don't be afraid not to answer questions. If you don't want to answer something, don't answer it. Don't feel pressured by the fact that you're, standing in this box and you've got the judge to the left of you and the barrister. You're not obliged to answer anything. So, if you want to say no comment or I don't want to talk about that, just make sure you say it, and make sure you bring a friend with you, because it can be quite emotional.
Yeah, I think that's all really important, and I think a lot of people have kind of forgotten that. I think it was really good when you gave evidence because you had that, you were willing to say, I don't want to talk about that anymore. And as you say, you're not compelled to. You're not on trial in any way, and you don't have to do that. I think that's really important.
You would have answered those questions in your written statement anyway, wouldn't you? So why should you have to repeat them again?
Yeah. Why should we? Yeah. Asking them all again, just repeating it all again. And don't forget, when Matt first went in to give his evidence, one of the first things he said is, I would like it to be acknowledged that, I've agreed to take part in this hostile inquiry.
What a wanker.
Yeah, what a wanker, yes.
What a fucking wanker. Yeah, there was so many things that, I mean, particularly at the start of him giving evidence, he claimed that once people heard his side of the story, they wouldn't think that he was manipulative in any way, and they'd see it from his point of view. I don't think anybody came away from it listening to his evidence seeing anything from his point of view.
I mean, yeah, that was one of the first things he said. Is, oh, once you hear it, you explain it, and then it might seem that I manipulated and deceived people, but give it after hearing me drone on for 5 days or whatever, like, you will come around to my point of view, is basically his very incorrect assessment of the.
Only in the case that he might have given us all sort of somehow frontal chemical lobotomies with his monotony. That was about it.
There were some very direct questions you had for him, which didn't really get put to him. He was given an opportunity to speak directly to you, an opportunity he failed to take.
That was one time I did see him get flustered, actually. Yeah, what did he say? No, sir. I think I would need some time to reflect on that. Thank you. Yeah, that was the one time he actually stuttered. Yeah, and looked really uncomfortable. And
because, I mean, as is ever the case, we got this juxtaposition of like your experiences of being in a relationship with this man, and then seeing the reports that he's filing about you at the same time.
yeah. Well, obviously, I mean, it's painful to read when you think that you're in a relationship with somebody, and then you read that they're writing these sort of like, quite sarcastic, rude, unpleasant reports about you. Yeah. But I think me myself, I don't know about some of the other women. I've kind of come to terms with that now and just think he's a bit of a wanker. And I'm not as hurt by that, but I know that some women still are, and I really sort of you know, they really had my empathy. But personally, I just, you know, I'm angry more than anything. Angry, far more angry than I am hurt. Yeah. So, but also, really betrays your people, because, like, any future relationships, you might sort of think, yeah, I wonder what they're really thinking. You know?
But I think, I mean, the whole betrayal and lack of trust, I think that is obviously most felt by people who had the deceptive relationships. But I think that applies to me, even though I was, you know, not deceived into any kind of sexual relationship. I only knew, I would say, I would have categorized Marco Jacobs as the closest one I knew, and I would say him as a friend, but not a close one. But still, the fact that that happened and I was deceived does affect me today in terms of like trust and stuff. You know, in terms of like, especially in terms of like organizing. You know, recently I've tried to do that, and I realised that, you know, definitely that impacted in the way that I was relating to the people who I didn't know very well in the room. You know, that experience for sure. I mean, it doesn't, you know, you know. It's, you know, obviously the impact is much deeper for some people, but also, you know, there's probably, you know, it's also quite wider than a lot of people imagine as well.
Yeah, I think it does affect your personal relationships once you found out. I mean, this is irrelevant to kind of what we're talking about, but not that long ago, I had sort of some involvement, a kind of relationship with somebody that went on for a couple of years. It was, you know, and then I found out that actually he was married. And now that would have hurt anyway. That would have hurt. But the worst thing was, he knew about the inquiry. He knew what I'd been through with Matt. And then you start to think, it must be me. It's got to be something about me. You know, why do I attract these, you know, manipulative, untruthful, dishonest men? And you start to blame yourself. And yeah, so.
I'm really sorry to hear that, and obviously, I hope it goes without saying that's clearly nothing to do with you or your fault in any way.
No, it's not. It's men, isn't it? I mean, like, this is the thing which goes like really deeper than the inquiry and deeper than these undercover policing units. It just shows that for so many men, when they're given the opportunity to be abusive, they take it, and it's something that's like really deep into the problem with the patriarchal society in which we live, that so many men so hate women that they're willing to do all these things for their own personal pleasures. I think that the opening statement by the lawyers for Cat H, Charlotte Kilroy, about what was really going on, where it talked about this dark playground that these undercover police officers, these men, were given in order to like do the job, but also given this opportunity to like fulfill their desires. It creates this framework for men to behave appallingly, and when given that opportunity, huge numbers of men seem willing to want to be able to take it. And that goes for police officers, but also in other walks of life, men do the same thing. And it's some really deep questions we need to ask ourselves as men, particularly, I think, about like kind of what the hell is wrong with men, and what the hell is wrong with the way in which we relate to women in that way.
Well, not all men. I mean, not yet. Not yet. You know.
I mean, I hope not, but
yeah, I know what you mean. As a whole, yeah, there is that. Oh, and by the way, I don't know, but the SDS weren't as secret as they thought they were, because when I worked for the London Ambulance Service, I knew an ex-copper. He was working at 111 as you know, it was a retirement job. He'd retired, because I mean, first of all, I was immediately suspicious of him. I thought, why is that? You know, this here, but he was actually quite empathetic, and he said it's disgusting. And they did know about the SDS, and they bloody hated them. He said, they thought they were the bloody like professionals. They thought they were the creme de creme, and you know, he just said, you know, they were on another level altogether, and they were bastards. And so they were not as secret as they thought, because I know they thought they were a unit within a unit with a unit, and they were deeply hidden away within a special branch. But no, Uniform knew about them, or some did, yeah. And they weren't liked even by other police officers.
But there was we've heard so many examples of ways in which information about the unit were leaking out. I mean, not least his nickname, Chiswick, which came from the fact that that's where the safe house was. And the first time he was asked where he was from, he said, "Oh, I've come from Chiswick." I mean, just from the get-go, I mean, his nickname appears to be the location of the safe house. This just seems insane. And I mean, the discovery that unbeknown, like supposedly we've heard from a lot of the managers saying, "Oh yeah, the reports were typed up by the detective sergeants." The detective sergeant said, "Oh no, we sent them to the typing pool."
Yeah.
Oh, but it was only the head of the typing pool herself who would type them up. No one else would. Like, do you believe that, mate? Really? I mean, like the level of security about the unit was not anywhere near
Yeah.
what they were trying to pretend it was.
Portray, yeah, I know. So
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a farce.
I just really want to know who he is. I don't know why. It's not really important, is it? He's just a bastard. But obviously, anybody who's been in a relationship with somebody who they didn't know who was would like to find out who they were. It's just natural curiosity, isn't it? And also to if he is some sort of public or semi-public figure, to tell his public who and what he really is and how he behaves. For their protection as much as anybody else's.
Absolutely. And I think there is precedent for the chair to name him at this juncture. With Vincent Harvey, he didn't name him until after the questioning when the facts had been established. That is available to the chair. I don't expect him to take that opportunity, but I would urge him to do so. I think everybody would. But I mean, the truth has got to out one way or another. Who he really is has to come out, and I'm sure it will.
Yeah, I hope so.
Tom, do we want to do an update of what's happening with the inquiry while we're doing this?
Yeah, just to quickly say, we've come to the end now of tranche 2, which means that all the deployments that started before 1993 have now been looked at. The next stage of the inquiry, tranche 3, will start on October the 13th, 2025. We'll be looking at the officers deployed from 1993 until 2007, which was when the Special Demonstration Squad was wound up. Obviously, there's still the National Public Order Intelligence Unit to go, which started a bit earlier than 2007.
1999. Yes, one of the confusing things about the next two parts is that it's largely looking at overlapping periods in time, but they're going to be dealt with completely separately in terms of hearings by the inquiry. And that has a lot of, it's going to make it even less for people following it. It's going to make it really confusing because, for instance, we know that some people who were spied on by SDS and POIU officers at the same time are being asked for statements about the surveillance, but only can see the evidence about the SDS. So even though they were being spied on by the other unit at the same time.
This is the bureaucratic nature of the inquiry, which is so dense and difficult for people to engage with. It doesn't help in getting to the truth at all. We'll all be covering them in as much detail as we have previously. Hopefully there'll be a greater degree of interest, just as these events are much more recent as we come into the 21st century. So yeah, I would really urge anybody who was involved in any kind of activism from 93 onwards to consider following the inquiry. Let us know if there's anything that you think we should be covering or any particular incidents that I think should be of interest.
Thanks, Simon.
There's also, should we do some plugs as well? March the 6th, ITV series, based on the Deep Deception book. A lot of the women appearing there.
Yeah.
And also, I think right at the end of May, I believe Kate Wilson's book, Disclosure, is also being published.
Hopefully the TV documentary will break through a bit. Just today when we're recording, it's been in the Daily Mirror and the Radio Times, as well as Good Housekeeping and a number of other publications where you don't normally find information about undercover police popping up. So look out for that and encourage your friends to watch if you can. We'll try and do some more episodes of the podcast between now and the return of the inquiry in October. Let us know if there's any particular topics you'd like us to cover or any particular officers who've given evidence you'd like us to look at again. If you were affected and you'd really like to do an episode about something, please get in touch. We'd love to have you on. Thanks for joining. You can find all the back episodes of the podcast and all the links to us on social media at spycops.info. If you want to see what's happening in the latest thing, just search for Spy Cops on whatever social media platform you prefer. If you're able to give us a 5-star review on whatever podcasting platform you use, it'd be really appreciated.
Oh, I didn't even know you could do that. But yeah, well done. Okay.
Liz had more to say about giving evidence at the inquiry.
Now, don't forget that when you're at the inquiry, you're there of your own volition, your own free choice, okay? So you don't have to answer anything you don't want to. Don't be intimidated by them. The most powerful people in the world, they were just little babies once, so just remember that. Make sure that you take a break whenever you want to. Just tell them you need a break. It's fine, that's your prerogative. Make sure that you eat, because you can feel a bit faint up there sometimes, and it is important to eat and keep hydrated. And don't forget, everybody is behind you. You do have lots of support, okay? So all the best, stay strong, and you've got everyone behind you. Bye.